Next, we're going to Japan. Very close to China, is it not? And the question that has been asked this week is, why haven't more people in Japan died from the COVID-19? And it has spawned dozens of theories, from Japanese manners to claims that the Japanese have superior immunity. Or perhaps they just weren't targeted. Well, surprisingly, in the region where the virus originated from, Japan does not have the lowest death rate for COVID-19 in the region, as South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong and Vietnam can all boast lower mortality rates. But in the early part of 2020, Japan saw fewer deaths than average, and this despite the fact that in April Tokyo saw about 1,000 excess deaths that were described as perhaps, not actual, perhaps due to COVID. And yet for the whole year, it is possible that overall deaths will be down on 2019. Does this make any sense? And what the report says is this is particularly striking because Japan has many of the conditions that actually make it vulnerable to the COVID-19, but it never adopted the approach to tackling the virus that some of its neighbours did. At the height of the outbreak in Wuhan in February, when the city's hospitals were overwhelmed and the world put up walls to Chinese travellers, Japan actually kept its borders open. And as the virus spread via the portal people, it became quickly clear that COVID is a disease that primarily kills the elderly and is massively amplified by crowds or prolonged close contact. And yet per capita, Japan has more elderly than any other country. Does that make sense? Japan's population is also densely packed into huge cities. Greater Tokyo alone has 37 million people in one city. And for most of them, the only way to get around is on the city's notoriously packed trains, where everyone's packed in like sardines. But then Japan also refused to heed the advice of the World Health Organization to test everyone. And even now, their PCR tests stands at just 348,000, or 0.27% of Japan's population. And nor has Japan had any lockdown on the scale or severity of Europe either. In early April, the government ordered a state of emergency, but the stay-at-home request was voluntary. Oops. And non-essential businesses were asked to close, but there was no legal penalty for refusing to do so. Now, given the criteria for COVID exposure, Japan should have been ransacked by deaths, with the elderly and everyone packed in like sardines. And what it shows is there's something radically amiss with this whole virus scenario, and also exposes the media complicity for it. So Japan is fairly close to China, next door, as is North and South Korea, as is Hong Kong and Vietnam, and yet all had low infection rates and deaths. Yet this magic virus rode Alibaba's carpet and hopped across 6,000 miles of water to California, and then did a quantum jump to America's epicenter and major harvesting and clown city of New York. Does that make any sense? Japan had no masks, little tests, and even when you do those tests, they provide an 80% false positive. 4 out of every 5 are false positives. Nor did they shut any major business down. Do you still think this is a natural event? You watch too much American and UK news channels if you do. And now the lawsuits start. And there's going to be many. A Southern Illinois couple has filed a lawsuit against the Illinois Department of Public Health and the State Board of Education, alleging that the state's plans to reopen schools this fall with safety protocols in place will result in immediate and irreparable harm to their 3 children. Actually, more harm staying at home, as we'll prove later. And the suit filed this week in Clay County by James and Callie Maynard. Oh dear. Did you make this stuff up? Callie Ma. Requests a temporary restraining order that will put a halt to mandatory facial coverings, temperature checks, and limitations on group of 50 or more individuals. And in the lawsuit, which was filed on Tuesday, the couple alleges that the IDPH and ISBE have promulgated unlawful, arbitrary, and capricious mandates that place an unreasonable burden on the family's 3 children. And the family's suit says that they have protectable rights and interests at stake to be free from unlawful, arbitrary, and capricious rulemaking, and that the rules that state officials have formulated are unlawful, since they are only aimed at preventing the spread of the coronavirus. One has to ask, why the sudden urge for children to return to school? There's no sudden urge to open all the businesses. There's no sudden urge to cancel the fake masks. And people have to remember there's always a program behind their narratives. And one has to ask the question, is it for vaccines without parental consent?